Welcome to the Spawn Chunks. This is episode number 382 for December 29th, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft. It's available on all of your favorite podcasting platforms, including a video version on YouTube and on Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, please consider subscribing wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me as always is my friend Johnny, but you may know him better as Board Games Pixel Riffs on the internet. Hello, sir.
Hello, I am somehow Board Games Pixel Riffs right now, tabletop games in general Pixel Riffs, and we've been talking a little bit about the tabletop games that we like to play with friends and family, and a little bit about fashion, since I got a little bit of new Minecraft merch in the post recently. That's all in the Render Distance, which is the extended version of the podcast, which you can get at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Pledging any of the paid tiers there gets you into our Discord, you can participate in Hangouts, and our next monthly Hangout is going to be coming up in January of 2026, where we'll cover both December and January of what our patrons have been up to in Minecraft. Also in February, we should have one of our quarterly hangouts where we talk about all the behind-the-scenes facts and figures of the podcast, talk about download numbers, YouTube metrics, all of that stuff. So if any of that interests you, once again, patreon.com/thespawnchunks. And good news, if you're thinking about signing up now, we have an end-of-year discount running from December 22nd until the 31st. So you've still got a couple of days to capitalize on that. You can get 20% off your first month on selected tiers. Just use the code CHUNK25 at the checkout, and you should get a nice discount on your first little period supporting the Spawn Chunks podcast.
Coming up this week on the show, we touch on the first info for a snapshot in 2026, discuss some emails from our listeners about Copper Golem's subtle subtitle accessibility, and dungeon upgrades.
Yes, lots of mail in the mailbag as always. Let's kick off with the quick login though, Joel. What have you been up to on the Citadel this week?
It has been an interesting week. I needed to start to think about the inside of the command center. So I currently had this square staging area of shulker boxes, which has been on some of the screenshots recently. And I thought, you know what? I've got these giant wings. There's more than enough room for me to set up a temporary storage area. So I just kind of took the rough design of like the 3x3 shulker boxes stuck on a wall with some barrels in between for the extra stuff that I don't need all the time, and moved it up into the inside of one of the wings. It was also a good test to see like how much room is in there. And what's nice about it is that there's plenty of room for some depth and design of the walls. And it's actually narrower than the existing staging area I had. So if I'm on one side getting diorite and I need something else like dirt or redstone on the other side, it's not quite as long a walk to go across the wing as it is across the center section of the command center. And so I moved everything up there and started to carve out the middle, which again is going to be an octagon. And I didn't do anything drastic. I just dug down 3 blocks and put a layer of andesite. Then I put some pearlescent fog lights behind some purple glass, and then another layer of stone, just to kind of smooth it all out and make it look kind of intentional. The idea, I think, is that I'm going to dig this down as a pit, and there's going to be some sort of energy core in there. And I don't know if I'm going to have it all underground and have a glass floor that you can just walk across, or if I'm going to have the core kind of like pop out of the middle a little bit and maybe have some headways and gangplanks and stuff. Right now, I'm still trying to get to the middle because the middle section is where I've got my vertical bubble columns that go all the way down to bedrock. So as I need to go down to different things that I found, like the trial chamber, get some tuff, that kind of stuff, I still need those. So I haven't completely kind of removed that. So I had to add in some glass bridges for now, just to kind of get myself over to the middle when I need to. It's also where the teleport block is to leave the area. And I actually like that look. So like happy accident, I might end up putting some sort of like glass / energy walkways around to kind of see what's up and kind of go from there. I'm debating on the ground right now, the floor design. I put a section of it as polished andesite. I'm going to try to come up with a couple of different textures and then test those to see what I like best and sprinkle those around as I go. But it is nice to kind of get everything out of the middle, look around, realize that I've made the side walkways. So the sides of the hexagon are wide enough. I want to say they're 9 blocks wide. So they're pretty good. You don't feel constricted. You don't feel like you're going to fall into the middle. You don't feel like you're too up against the wall. So that's a cool thing to know going forward. However, I did run into some challenges. And one of those was I like the look of having these bay doors at the base of every wing wide open. But the problem now that I've removed my 3 block tall central storage area is that I can see right through the base and right out open the back door. It's like having the front and back door of your house open if they
Right.
lined up.
Yeah.
Right. So you're just like, okay, so now I'm thinking it might be a better idea to have that central core come up into the middle and create some sort of central focal point so that you're not like walking into the base and then looking right out the outside. It's the same with the left and the right. If you look to the wings on your left and right, you can still sort of see out. But I thought maybe if I put the elevators kind of protruding from the wall as opposed to in the wall, then that would also block that view and still give me like 6 or 8 blocks of room to walk around. So I haven't figured out exactly the tech I'm going to use for getting up and down. I don't think I want to do stairwells. I think I want to do some sort of bubble column elevator. I don't think I want to do command blocks to like teleport myself up. I feel like that's a little bit outside of the vanilla experience I kind of want to have. So I'm still debating all that kind of stuff. But those elevators protruding from the wall should be enough to block the view of the sides when you're walking in. So it does feel more like an encased space. And at the moment, of course, there's no roof on anything. So it feels very wide open like an atrium. And I'm debating how much of that I want to leave. Where's my storage going to be eventually? Like, do I want to put it somewhere up high? Is that going to be a pain in the butt to get to? Will it matter when I'm flying back around? Like if I'm flying back to this base anyway from different points on this island, what's the difference between flying into a hangar bay that's maybe on the top of it versus flying into the bay at the bottom, which I've been doing. So it's just kind of like relearning the habits that I've had over the last couple of months working in the area. So it's been fun to put together. I like the look of it at night. It's got that cool glowy sci-fi look. So I want to come up with a cool idea for the frog lights and somehow making them blink or strobe, because I don't want to use the textures for redstone lamps. And I was watching Impulse SV the other day using sticky pistons to move frog lights in and out of view as part of like a lighting thing. So I want to try to do something like that. And I'm thinking if I can do that and hook it all up to observers where it might be something that can cascade, I might have if you're looking down into this dark pit, it might be kind of cool to see the light go from bright to brighter and kind of like pulse back and forth, because it doesn't have to be off. Because I mean, something like a warp core on the Enterprise, specifically like the Next Generation, it was always on. It would just kind of like get brighter as it would kind of pulse. So I want to try and mimic that somehow. And I've not done a proof of concept. I don't know how big it has to be. I'm not sure what that's going to look like or how noisy it's going to be. But I think it should be far enough away that even if we could hear pistons, it would only be the first set. And then once it goes down into like the third and fourth set, they might be far enough away that it doesn't really affect the player. So that could be fun. Plus, remind me, I think they reduced the noise on pistons like a couple updates ago, right?
Yeah, I think they've reduced the noise and the distance at which you can hear them. Like they used to be a lot more audible from further away, so I think that's been adjusted since.
Yeah.
And I like the notion, obviously you've not gone like the full sort of fog pit with layers of glass like this, but I do wonder if you could have an effect where it got brighter and dimmer at the bottom of one of those pits, because usually it ends with a light source that kind of shines up through them. And so I wonder if it'd be possible to like move that around a little bit. But obviously that's a lot of work with the layers of glass. I do really like the transparent bridges, though. It helps that you've got like a connected glass texture going on, so you can't see as much of like the edges of each single glass block, because that very much adds to the illusion of something like in Portal where they've got like the hard light bridges and stuff like that. I think there's something to be said for that, looking more sci-fi with the limited amount of sci-fi block palette we have natively in Minecraft. So I think that's looking really nice. And I like the use of purple as opposed to like blue or green. I feel like those are more typically sci-fi colors, so it kind of sets itself apart by using purple there.
Thanks. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is just inspired by the colors of the frog lights, right? So I prefer the frog lights as a light block texture to something like a sea lantern, which I was expecting to use more of. And the frog lights there's more white in them and there's less contrast. And they do have either purple, yellow, kind of orange, and green. And so I'm going to probably lean on orange glass, purple glass, and green glass when I'm using the related frog lights. And thanks. Yeah, I do have a custom texture as well as a connected texture. So my glass texture is 32 by 32, not 16 by 16. And it removes the little dash lines that are in the middle. It still has the darker rim, but it's thinner. So it's like half a pixel instead of a full pixel. So it's just a little bit more sleek looking. Something I was thinking of though was it would be nice to have something along the sides of those bridges. Thinking maybe like pale oak shelves could be interesting. Just
Hmm.
something that looks like there's something projecting the energy as opposed to just the energy
Yeah.
floating there. So, but then again, this is just like a really quick proof of concept. And if I took these lights that you see around the rim of everything and lower them down, and then where the bridges are, maybe there could be three lights that are kind of shining, like look like they're shining horizontally to illuminate the bridge, like across the chasm. That could be a way to do it too. It also, again, it could be something where I just want to create a whole floor that's glass. Like maybe I don't want to have to worry about falling off. You know, it's never a good ending in Star Wars. The pedways have no railings,
Yeah.
and always something bad happens, right? Like it's never a good situation. So, but that, you know, that's where the fun ended. I decided to use the Happy Ghast to move my villagers. I was moving the allays and trying to get a couple of those other things that were in the way in the main central area, those temporary farms, and move them up into the wing as well. And I was testing my patience live on stream. Not only are
Hmm.
villagers just a pain anyway, but the Happy Ghast, to try and use that to move a villager. While yes, it is easier once you get a villager in a boat and attached to a Happy Ghast to fly it up as opposed to building some infrastructure with rails and all that kind of stuff. But the frustration of trying to remember how to attach a boat to a Happy Ghast,
Yeah.
trying to do that with a villager in it, and then flying the Happy Ghast when you can't see anything that you're doing, even in third person. You can't see the boat. You can't see the bottom of the Happy Ghast. You can't back up far enough. I had to use my free cam mod to make sure I wasn't suffocating the villager. The moment that you get off the Happy Ghast to then try and figure out how to release the villager from the boat without breaking the boat, which is very hard to do, the Happy Ghast flies away.
Yeah.
And so you
Yeah.
have to have a snowball in your hand. And even if you have a snowball in the hand, if the Happy Ghast doesn't see you right away, it still flies 30 blocks away. And then you have to get its attention again and hope as it's flying around your build, it doesn't suffocate the villager, which almost happened twice. Like I was losing my mind. And I was like, is this easier? I don't know that this is easier. I honestly think I probably would have had a better time if I just built a dirt staircase with powered rails and did it that way. And
Yeah.
so the biggest problem for me was, despite doing this show, I couldn't remember how to attach a boat to a Happy Ghast. Like there's a shift right click that you have to do.
Yeah.
And thank you to my chat for reminding me, because I don't know if you were playing this game blind, if you weren't looking at wikis, if you weren't watching tutorials on YouTube, I don't know how you'd figure that out. I really don't. And it, again, like to know how to do that and then to know how to fly it and maneuver it and not make the grave error of like flying your ghast around something only to have the boat and the entity in it fly into blocks and then suffocate in the same way that you will suffocate on top of a Happy Ghast if you get too close to blocks. The fact that you don't hit your head, I find so bizarre.
Hmm.
It was not a great experience. Like I'm really on the fence about, you know, how often I'm going to be using Happy Ghasts for things that, oh yeah, it seems like this should be a good idea. And now I'm like, you know what? I don't know if this is going to be worth the hassle.
Yeah, shears are really your friend when it comes to leash connections now, and that's
Right.
something that we're all still adjusting to, myself
Yeah.
included. Like, I
Yeah.
haven't used the Happy Ghast to move entities around all that much, so I haven't experienced this frustration firsthand, but the problem, yeah, becomes often you forget to bring shears with you, and then you can't like put an ender chest down just on top of the Happy Ghast to like pull out whatever, you know, iron or backup equipment that you might have or whatever. So you've got to have a block nearby, which means you've either got to fly the Happy Ghast down or you've got to trust that when you let it go, it's not just gonna, you know, fly its way into various objects, and which it does with no regard for the passengers in the boat. So yeah, I can see that being a frustration. It's the kind of thing that I'm prepared for because I've been studying the mechanics for the sake of doing tutorials, but for casual gameplay, I expect it's a real pain.
And isn't a shear how you remove the harness from the Happy Ghast?
Yeah, there's a priority. It's like leashed objects first and then
Okay.
harness. Yeah, and so
Right.
it's remembering that that's the order that things happen in, and that you're not just going to like, you know, free your Happy Ghast and suddenly have it roaming around everywhere. Yeah, like it takes a bit of getting used to, and I imagine that the road to getting used to it is like the trial and error road. I think that's how they expect new players to get familiar with these mechanics is just try everything and work on the sort of, the observations that they can make out of things going wrong a bunch of times before they go right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and one of the reasons why I really didn't want to have anything happen with the villagers, I mean, I had 4, so even if bad things happened twice, I would still be okay if I eventually wanted to breed up more.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I'm on a mushroom island, so I have already transported the villagers from miles away.
Yeah, of
and
course.
so I didn't want to have to do that again, because the village could be potentially farther. I don't know if that one still has villagers in it. So there's some things about, like, I don't want to do things over again. That was kind of pushing my patience to the limit. But
Yeah.
the villages themselves, I was going to put them in little cells and have some basic trading going on, but they just didn't want to listen. So they're now just in boats, kind of like hanging out. I just decided not today. The next stream, I was like, not doing that today. We're just gonna. I might not even do it on stream. I might just kind of move them around. But I mean, I know how to do it from now. Like I can get a minecart to the boat, and one of the boats is off on the side, and it's in a really awkward position because, again, like I couldn't get the Happy Ghast to stay where I wanted it to stay. I think that was the biggest frustration. Like, I mean, sure, a lot of the stuff with the shears and the leashes and stuff, like, that's on me, obviously. But it was the fact that the Happy Ghast would turn tail and run the moment I stepped off of it.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that it had something attached to it and that I was doing something with it. Even happens when I'm building. I really wish that there was like a delay when you get off of a Happy Ghast. You kind of want them to just hang out for a second to make sure you don't want anything before you fly away. It's a subtle thing, but I think the fact that it immediately hightails in the opposite direction is just like, are we really friends? Are you that happy with me? I get the feeling you're kind of pissed off. Like, it's one of those things that's, it's not the most pleasant game experience when you're using it for building and you want to like hop off and grab a block or hop off and do something that you can't reach with the Happy Ghast and then hop back on again. And by the time you turn around, he's 40 blocks away. And it's like, what? we were just doing a thing. Why are you way over there? So anyway, it's definitely something where I feel like the use cases for me are getting narrower for the Happy Ghast. There are some things that I do find useful, like building these wings with one much faster. Like, I think that it was faster using the Happy Ghast once I got the order of operations down. And in building in future, I will know when to use them in that way. But there's definitely use cases where they're not as fast and they're not as convenient.
Yeah, I can see that. I do think a delay makes a lot of sense, and that's something maybe they could consider as feedback in future to implement like 5 or 10 seconds even where it just stays still for a moment so that you can step off and then step back on again when you need it. I think is going to make it a lot more usable for the building use case, at least. Like, there might be some things like, I know Cubfan did a minigame with Gasketball in the last season of Hermitcraft that kind of relied on them flying around everywhere, but those also weren't wearing a harness. They were just kind of free roaming in a closed-in area. So I think there's all sorts of potential use cases for the Happy Ghast that I think would be improved by it having like a little bit more, I guess, quality of life with handling it. Makes a lot more sense.
So what have you been up to on the survival guide?
I'm taking my time working through Mounts of Mayhem at the moment. My current projects have no interaction with oceans or deserts, so I haven't had a chance to get hands-on experience with the Nautilus or the Camel Husk at the time of recording. That is probably my plan to do before I go away for my Christmas break, but I haven't got my hands on any of them as of right now. So mostly what I've been doing is on streams, I've been continuing my third zone of this beacon mine, which is continuing at a steady pace. I get maybe like 4 layers on the y-axis done every stream, every sort of 3 hours, because I have to go back and forth to repair my tools and stuff. I'm not making like a ton of Silk Touch pickaxes and just leaving them there. So far I'm just bracing myself every time I hear a zombie noise through the floor, because I go, please, not another spawner, please. I don't need more of them. And I think at this point, if it was just a single spawner on its own, I would just destroy it. If it was 2 spawners, I think I'd probably still destroy it because I've got 2 spawners already. But yeah, I brace myself every time I hear a zombie noise. On the side, though, I have been revisiting Trial Chamber loot for yet another YouTube Shorts that's just becoming like a trilogy of rants that I have about people's misconceptions about Trial Chamber loot, because people still... probably just like younger players who insist that things work this way because they want to brag about stuff, but people still have this misconception that you can time when you put the key into an ominous vault to get the loot that you want. And I looked into it to the point where I discovered that Java Edition trial chambers actually work differently to Bedrock Edition trial chambers. Java loot is a predetermined sequence regardless of what order you open Ominous Vaults in. So if you load up a world with exactly the same seed, you go to exactly the same vault, it gives you, let's say, like a heavy core, a couple of wind charges, and an enchanted book. Which is pretty good loot, all things considered. If you loaded up the same world seed, went to a different Ominous Vault first and opened it, you would still get a heavy core, some wind charges, and an enchanted book, because the loot is basically a sequence that it decides based on the world seed. On Bedrock Edition, you get the same loot, but you always get it from the same vault each time you open it. So if you went to one on Bedrock Edition, but then you went to a different one, you'd get different results, but they would always be the results those vaults were going to give you. It's sort of on a per vault basis on Bedrock, which is different to Java. And again, that doesn't seem like a big deal in terms of parity features, but I think it led some people, when I was demonstrating some of this stuff on Java, to be like, that's not the way it works on Bedrock. And I'm like, it kind of works the same way on Bedrock. But yeah, anybody who thinks that they can predict when a heavy core is going to show up without like using external tools is clearly just full of it at this point. I've proved that fairly definitively to myself, at least, and I imagine there are still going to be some naysayers in the comments because people like to believe that they know the trick of how the slot machine works. But either way, it's been fun to look into those mechanics and learn a little bit more of the depth that goes into things, especially considering that some of the changes that have come along in this week's snapshot also do that with, I think, villager trades. They're making them kind of more predetermined, and I think a lot of that is the result of making aspects of Minecraft loot data-driven, so that players with data packs and so forth can have more control over that stuff and make it more sort of a customized experience for their own efforts if they want to.
Yeah, I was looking at the snapshot as well and thinking like it feels like more and more of what Mojang is doing is going this route, right? Where it's less about the grind of re-rolling stuff and more about like, this is just how it's going to go. Like, this is what happens when you go here and do this. And they've been changing loot tables a little bit in the previous snapshots as well. They're little notes that we read on the show. We don't really dive into them because they're usually very technical behind the scenes. There's usually a lot more on the news read that we don't do on the show because it's a lot of behind the scenes for data developers or whatever. But it's interesting to think about the stuff being predetermined. So so rerunning trial chambers doesn't, like, it wouldn't have the same appeal because unless you've got something that you know you're going to get that's good, right? Like, I guess it depends on how you want to approach it.
I think an interesting aspect of this is, let's say, for example, you were doing a speed run of some kind, and it was like it was dependent on the loot you got from a trial chamber. If you knew the seed ahead of time, you would know exactly where you wanted to go, how many vaults you needed to open, and then you'd get a heavy core and you could move on to whatever your next objective was. And the same goes for if you've lost a world, like you were working on a survival world for like 6 months, and for whatever like data loss happened and you ended up losing that world save. If you really like that seed and you want to get back to the same amount of progress you did, you could theoretically go and get the same items from those vaults and be guaranteed that you're going to get a heavy core instead of having to spend all of that time re-rolling. And if the same is now true for villagers, if you know which villager you're going to get mending from, for example, I think it takes a lot of the guesswork out of restoring the amount of progress you'd made in a world if you have to start from scratch for whatever reason. So I think there are elements like that where those fringe cases make it a very good thing, and to everybody else it still appears random, so there's really no harm in it being done that way.
Are we ready to move on to the news, or do you have more that you want to...
No, I think that's basically it. I don't really have much to share in terms of screenshots this time around. I will probably have made more progress by the time the episode comes out, but for now, that's it for me this week.
So we actually have a snapshot look. It's Minecraft Java Edition 26.1, Snapshot 1. This is the new naming convention for snapshots for the new year. This was published on Tuesday, December 16th, right after we had recorded our last 2 episodes. It is the final release of 2025, and we're upgrading our runtime version of Java, giving villager trades and data-driven treatment, and adding a new swing command that swings the arms of entities. Finally, all of our builds will now be unobfuscated moving forward. Changes in 26.1 Snapshot 1. Trades unlocked by villager professions are now determined using deterministic random sequences like loot drops and barter loot. The algorithm that maps block and skylight levels to how bright things appear on screen has been fully rewritten. A new light map debug renderer was introduced, which can be enabled using F3+4 as a keybind. Since this is the holiday episode, and this was a technical snapshot published a week or two before this episode will actually air, we will spare you the reading of all the fine details, but you can find them in the Minecraft.net changelog article linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
Yeah, as we were filling this in with the show notes, we figured there's a lot of very technical, like crunchy stuff here, a lot of which is going to be of interest to people, especially if you've been looking into the lighting side of things. But so much of it, I think, is better represented visually that I'll point you folks to the videos that Azumovoid and Slice Lime have been doing, which are always really good quality, very easily digestible versions of a lot of these like lighting changes and stuff like that, and illustrating that stuff side by side. I have on occasion noticed stuff like when you have a night vision potion and you're looking at like an underwater space, for example, whenever there's glow lichen, the light areas that you're looking at because of night vision that would normally be completely dark seem to be like a different color, or it's sort of brighter than the areas where glow lichen is providing block light to that area. So I think that's what some of those lighting changes are adapting to. But I expect this also has a little bit to do with them just making sure all of the lighting and rendering stuff for Vibrant Visuals is ready for Java editions. So once again, much like the data-driven aspect of everything kind of piecing together to be something that's sort of greater than the sum of its parts, I think that's what we're seeing with these rendering changes that are just being made incrementally over time, and it's all adding up to what feels like a big change when considered in retrospect.
Yeah, I mean, it all seems to line up towards Vibrant Visuals for me as well. And I will link both Exuma and Slice Lime videos in the show notes on thespawnchunks.com so people can find them easy enough. Both of those folks are worth a follow on YouTube anyway. And as far as the trades go, I didn't get all the way through Exumovoid's video. I've had a very busy week. And as far as I can tell, I think I understand that the villager will always have the same trades. So instead of having to, if you're re-rolling, say, librarian villagers, rather than breaking the lectern and putting it down again and then getting different trades with a villager, you will always get the same. So once that villager has begun trading with you, it's always going to be the same trades no matter what you do. You'll have to make a new villager with a new lectern that is a librarian to get different traits. And you'll have to do that until you get the trade that you want, if that's what you're going for. If you're grinding through trades and you're looking to create like a villager trading hall where you have like the best trades or the trades that you want. Am I understanding that correctly? Like that seems to be where
I think
my head is at.
That's part of it, and I think it's also that once a villager is spawned in the world, let's say you made a copy of that world, or let's say you went to the same village in the same world seed and it had generated like a fixed amount of villagers along with the structures. The way when you go to a new area, there's always like mobs that are populating it already. There's usually an iron golem already walking around the village. Those villagers, if the same ones all have the same professions, if you reproduced exactly the same world seed and you went there, they would have the same starter trades available to you already. If you start changing their professions before you've locked in a trade, I think that can still adjust some things. But then let's say you had a librarian villager that was spawned in exactly the same place and had a mending trade. If you were to like reseed the world, if you went back into a fresh world but with the same world seed and you went to that same librarian, they would have the same book trade, and then every other trade that they have would follow the same pattern. It would just be kind of predetermined what they were going to have in the first place. And that goes sort of along with what I was saying about Trial Chamber Loot. If you wanted to reproduce the progress you'd made in a world, if you went to one village and found a specific librarian who had mending, chances are that librarian would be there in the identical place again if you were to go back in a fresh version of that world.
So my villager trading hall in Dartmouth Meadows predates the update to villagers and workstations. So there is a contraption where the villagers would be brought forward by minecart. I don't exactly remember how I would interact with them. There wasn't a workstation nearby because we had to retrofit all of the villagers' stalls for the workstations. But essentially you would trade with the villager, and if it wasn't the villager that you wanted, or if it was a nitwit, then you would have to get another one. And in order to get another one, you'd have to just dismiss the one that you had in front of you. And it would just go behind the curtain.
Yeah.
is where it would go. And it would never come back ever again. And I'm wondering if we're going to see a resurgence of that kind of villager trading. If you're looking for a specific trade, you'll have to be putting down a lectern in front of them. And I guess at this point, rather than waiting for the game to give you the right kind of villager, you're just going to get a villager. And then you can change the villager's profession by putting a lectern in front of them, or a smithing table, or like whatever it is that you want to trade them, trade with them, like a mason, that kind of stuff. So at least you have to go through the options there before you decide that villager didn't have the trades that I wanted for the 3 professions I'm looking for. I need to move on to the next villager. And villager breeders are pretty straightforward to put together. So I feel like that's going to become a thing again, because Minecraft players that are this technical are usually looking for the straightest line to get what they want, right?
Yeah, it's true. But I think it is still possible to re-roll their trades. You break the lectern, you put it back down, they will give you something else. But the order in which they give you something else would always be the same order if it was that villager in a duplicate of the world. So like if you're re-rolling a librarian, they give you fire aspect, you break the lectern, you put it down, they give you protection 3, you break the lectern, you put it down, they give you, I don't know, a frostwalker 2. You're like, if you tried that again in a separate copy of the world, you would still get fire aspect, and then you'd get protection, and then you'd get frostwalker, right? So it's not necessarily impossible to reroll that villager's trades. They're not linked to the villager permanently, but it's more the case that the randomness behind the scenes is kind of set in stone already. So like it's not that you need to breed a ton of villagers to do it. It's more that the sequence in which those results come up would always be the same sequence if you were doing it in identical copies of the world. Like if you and a friend were racing side by side in a world to get a mending trade, you would both be getting the same sequence of books one after the other as you tried to re-roll that villager.
Right.
And again, I don't think this is going to have a ton of effect. Yeah, like it's not going to have a ton of effect on the average survival player looking for a mending trade or whatever, but it's just going to be one of those quirks of the game that maybe will show up in a couple of situations.
And I could see this, now that I understand it more, as where this has a predictable outcome. Yeah. Like this villager's, sequence is going to be predictable or deterministic, as they described. If you're a data pack author or a mod author, then having that be predictable as opposed to random would be advantageous. Like you could then, if you're doing something special, something custom, you're creating an adventure map, or you're doing something like that, and the thing that you want to do has to do with villager trades and roles, and it's frustrating that it's random and not in a certain sequence, then this would eliminate that, and then you'd have a map that you could follow. There'd be a road map that you could follow. Okay.
Imagine like you've got a skyblock map and you put one villager on an island somewhere. The person making the skyblock map could have a little bit of control over, okay, well, the third book trade that you reroll on the lectern is going to come up as a mending one. And you can have that effectively be part of the scenario if you want to orchestrate it that way, basically. And obviously that's custom map stuff. For the average survival player in a vanilla default world, it's not going to make that much difference. But yeah, I like the fact that this is at least a mechanic that's been revealed to players at this point, so people understand a little bit more about how that works. And again, it's part of villager trades being data-driven that has caused this change, I believe.
Moving on into Chunk Mail. If you would like to email the show, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Please keep your emails short and to the point if you can. It does help us include them in the show. Be sure to let us know if you're a patron in the subject line or very early on in the email, as it does help us organize things behind the scenes. It is the end of the year, and we are going to archive some of the older emails in the inbox that have become a bit dated. It's not that they're bad, it's just that we get so many emails, it's hard to fit everyone in the show. And if you were one of 3 emails guessing what the copper golem might be used for, even if it's a good email, we now know what the copper golem is going to be used for. So including those emails in the show isn't really a thing. What that means, though, is that there's a lot more room in the chunk mailbox. So if you want to be included on the show in an email, then it's a great time to write in. There's going to be a new show starting in January. I think the 5th or 6th is our first show of the new year. So be sure to write in. It's spawnchunkmail@gmail.com.
This time around, we have an email from Phoenix Shade 258 with the subject of A Coppery Past. Hi, Pix and Joel. I was just thinking about the Copper Golem statues and wondered if there was a way to make it known to the player base that these exist, and wondered, could these be placed in the loot tables of certain archaeology dig sites? It would be a nice little expansion of the loot found in those structures, nothing game-breaking, and letting people know that they even exist, because I'd wager that most people just instantly wax them as soon as they make one. It would also let people find the little guys already in statue form, since I know waiting for them all to oxidize can be an absolute pain. Phoenix Shade 258 died of old age waiting for her copper golems to oxidize.
So I like the idea of copper golems being out there in the world. And I don't know about loot tables. Like, I don't know if I want to find one in a chest. I kind of like the idea of just stumbling upon one frozen in just frozen in the world. And when I think about that and the color of them, my mind went to mossy cobble and those big outcrops of mossy cobble that you find in like the giant taiga forests. And I just think it would be neat as just a point of interest in the world to be exploring this giant ancient forest with all this cool texture and ferns and stuff in the bottom. They'd be pretty well hidden. They'd almost be camouflaged. Just to stumble upon a copper golem kind of frozen, kind of like how Dorothy discovers the Tin Man, in The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
I think it'd be kind of fun. I feel like it could be an interesting way to introduce them to players as well, because outside of advancements, I don't think there's anything else indicating like how to make one in the game, besides shows like this and changelogs and YouTube videos, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the context in which they're found could really change people's first impression of the Copper Golem as well. Like, if they were just out there in the wild in a biome, it doesn't immediately suggest what their purpose is either. So, like, you learn about copper chests independently of copper golems, you start to think, are the two connected? And it leaves the player to make that connection themselves, instead of having one, let's say, already tidying up the chests in like an ancient city or some other kind of structure. It could be interesting to see how introducing them in different places encourages the player to look at them differently. I think finding them in archaeological sites, imagine that one of them is like buried in that little extra burial chamber of a desert temple, for example, could be a fun idea. And it raises the question of, did previous civilizations use copper golems? Were they initially made as statues and the player can imbue them with life, or were they there to perform some kind of function and then seized up over time because they hadn't discovered that you could wax them, and that was an innovation that the player decides on their own? Right now, copper golems not spawning anywhere naturally in the world, they feel like a creation of the player, where iron golems occur naturally in villages. And so it's interesting to think about whether the player could pick up on the notion of iron golems being possible by learning about them from villagers creating iron golems. Do they then figure out copper golems from there, and it becomes the sort of like experiment of the players? I think that's an interesting question to ask, and that may be even why we don't find them spawning anywhere natural in the world, is because they are intended to be sort of the immediate subject of player experimentation. You find out you can create a snow golem or an iron golem by putting a pumpkin on something. You think, what else am I going to put a pumpkin on that will turn into a little guy? And then copper seems like an easy jump from iron. But yeah, I'm curious if there are any players out there, even though like lately you and I have been talking a little bit about players that we've been watching play Minecraft without any previous guidance. Right. How quickly they discover that copper golems are a thing, whether they start looking up changelogs or something after a while of playing, or do they just happen upon the mechanic purely by accident. Now, I will say, in answer to Phoenix Shade's email, if you want copper golems to freeze up quickly, create them using fully oxidized copper blocks, because if you have fully oxidized copper, it takes a matter of seconds for them to shut down, as opposed to having to wait for them to age through the various stages. But since they can be made at any individual age, you can cause them to oxidize just like that. And then if you want them to stay in that oxidized form but still be walking around, you've got to apply wax to them right away, otherwise they will seize up, and then the only way to reactivate them is to tap them with an axe until they are fresh copper golems again, and then the next axe tap after that will reactivate them. And at that point, you've got to wait for them to age even further. So it does take a little bit of time that way, but create them with oxidized copper blocks to begin with, and you'll have a bunch of statues before you know it.
So if you want a copper golem that is not fully oxidized, can you scrape him while he's still alive and moving?
Yeah, you can.
Oh, yeah.
You can scrape them back to previous aging stages, and you can also do that when they're statues. But then, you can create them at any stage of oxidation with the copper blocks as well. So if you wanted a weathered but not fully oxidized copper golem, you could create one that way and then wax them. Yeah, so there's a few different approaches to it, but if you want the statues, oxidized copper is definitely the way to go.
If you're using a waxed block, does the copper golem unwax the block when it's made?
Yeah, I don't think they keep the waxed status once you've made the golem out of the block. Likewise, I don't think the chest emerges from that process waxed either. So yeah, it's immaterial whether you used wax or oxidized, like unwaxed copper to do it. Yeah.
Right. Okay, cool. Well, that's good to know. Copper is one of the things I do want to mess with in the command center area, and like somewhere on the island, I'm going to do something with copper because I've got this trial chamber and I've got tons of it available to me if I want to, and I think it could be neat to have copper golems look like they're mining out the trial chamber or something. So having more control over that could be kind of fun. Even just having some sort of like ancient dig, like maybe there's this, the people that are part of the space operation happening or digging up some ancient ruin. Like I don't know. It could be fun to mess around with something like that.
They definitely feel like ancient technology as well, sort of like how the Iron Golem has vines growing up it, so there's something about it that doesn't quite fit with like a sci-fi build if you wanted little robot helpers walking around, but effectively they are little robot helpers in the meantime, so I think there's a neat blurring of the lines that can happen there.
And I'm thinking about doing some custom textures for flavor for things that don't fit with the sci-fi, but I may want to have around. So things like bees for honey blocks and for honeycomb. For whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, for the way that they spawn, I'm getting a ton of bats spawning on the Mushroom Island.
Yeah.
And they're either spawning in caves and flying up to the surface, or they're spawning on some of the natural stone blocks that I'm exposing as I remove the mycelium. And it's kind of annoying because the bats don't really fit the sci-fi vibe. So I was thinking it would be fun to retexture them as like Minox from Star Trek or Star Wars or something.
Well, they're like drones or something, yeah.
Or that was the other thing was like if I make them into little robot drones that are hovering around, that could be really fun. It would be a decent project because I don't know how to do that at all. It would involve a new model and maybe adding some animation, and obviously changing the sound of a bat to not a squeak. But like it would be more fun to have them bouncing around as this little ambient background droid like you see in Star Trek and Star Wars all the time, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That could be kind of fun. Probably more Star Wars in terms of how it would fit the aesthetic, but yeah, that could be interesting to do. And then same thing with copper golems. Like if I want to use copper golems in my build somehow, they're cool and they do sort of fit the sci-fi vibe, but I would maybe change the color of them or remove or change the top of their antenna thing. Like it could be fun to retexture them, even if they were white, or I wanted to have them be different colors because there's different oxidation stages. I wonder if from a data point perspective or data pack perspective, if you could then assign different models to the different stages. So if I want control over those stages, instead of a pose, I could make one, I'm going to use an example that I wouldn't do like on my content, but you could make one look like R2-D2. You could make one look like a Jawa. You could do different things that don't affect your building. Like I'm not giving myself a new block. I'm not adding any new blocks to the game, but it would affect the flavor of your experience. Same thing with, I thought about changing the villagers. It would be interesting to change the villagers into something that's not just a couple of Minecraft villagers hanging around. It'd be cool to turn them into maybe something that looks like a C-3PO or something like that. That could be kind of fun. So we'll have to see what I come up with. It could be a fun project for some pixel art on the side. So we'll have to see. Mm-hmm. The next email comes in from Abhinav, Subtle Accessibility. Hey, Pix and Joel. I was thinking, why don't we have any customization for subtitles in Minecraft? I personally find them very useful when mining or exploring to figure out certain mob sounds or lava pops, but sometimes they cover a huge part of the screen and we have no way to make the font smaller, unlike chat size. With the addition of trial chambers and new sounds, sometimes it gets difficult to see around the area. I like playing with a 4x GUI for better hotbar visibility, and I wish there was an option to change the subtitle font size for better accessibility. Abhinav was blown up by a creeper who was hidden behind the subtitles.
I, for one, have definitely seen huge amounts of subtitles build up. That naturally happens in much more noisy areas, but I remember running the copper farm that we built on Empire Season 2 when Azuma was visiting the server with the hermits and helped me build a copper farm there, and that was noisy as all heck, because you had the player swinging a sword, you had bubble columns, you had splashing of water, you had zombies, you had the conversion sound into drowned, and like all of these different things just adding up and adding up. And so yeah, I think while it obviously happens in specific areas a lot more, I can see it getting overwhelming, and especially if you've increased the GUI scale size and the scale of the subtitles changes as a result, I can see them occupying a lot of screen real estate at this point. So yeah, I feel your pain there.
If you're open to playing with mods, then Subtitle Tweaks is a mod that I found before the show that gives you control over the background color, the scale, as well as the horizontal and vertical offset of subtitles in Minecraft. We'll have a link to that in the show notes on modrinth.com. A quick look at the GUI for it suggests that you have quite a lot of control, and it seems to be that it would be separate from your GUI. You probably have to tweak it in relation to the GUI. So if you're already at 4, you're probably going to want to shrink things down. But if you're playing with a higher or a smaller GUI, I guess, in terms of the scale, then maybe you want to bump the subtitles up. It depends on what you're doing. And even if the subtitles as they stand are an okay size, you could at least move them so that they're not obscuring your view. We were talking about that with the discussion on maps the other day, where having a map in the lower third of the game seems really kind of something that obscures your gameplay, whereas having it in the top third is kind of like part of the game UI, kind of a heads-up display, and it's less in the way, a little bit more intuitive, that kind of stuff. So that could be something that you could look at. I wonder, with more GUI accessibility options, if there's going to be more of that kind of stuff coming with Vibrant Visuals. So obviously Vibrant Visuals is going to change the way that the game looks, and there were some different options added to Bedrock Edition in terms of how Vibrant Visuals looks for your computer and for your experience in the game. But I'm also wondering if more control, more granular control, could be coming in the menus for Minecraft on Java Edition to aid in this kind of thing. So what I'm thinking of is if you're using Vibrant Visuals and it makes blooms in the background visually, like light blooms, sun shafts, if it reflects a lot on the water and the water is very sparkly, and that interferes with how you read your chat or how you read your subtitles, then maybe more granular control built into Minecraft would make sense, because now you've got something that's happening in Minecraft visually in the background that wasn't before, and that might make some of the text harder to read.
Yeah, I think there's definitely precedent for more tweaks like that to arrive. Like they seem to be doing a lot right now with separating out visual options and giving people more granular control. I think it's a good time for tweaks like this to arrive. And it is funny to think of an accessibility feature needing accessibility features of its own, but I totally appreciate where we're going with this. And my thought, if you weren't messing around with mods but you were open to stuff like resource packs, is that I know on-screen text can be affected by resource packs, sometimes like font changes and the like, but I imagine if you're changing the text size of subtitles, that might also be impacting the global text size. So I'm glad you found that mod, because that does seem like potentially the way to go. And I feel like another solution, maybe from Mojang's part, because I don't think this is possible to do in the game right now, would be an easier way to switch subtitles on and off, which I know might be a problem for accessibility, because, you know, you could easily hotkey something and then go, hey, where'd my subtitles go, and not know what you pressed. But on the other hand, as part of gameplay these days, I feel like people rely on subtitles even if they don't need them for accessibility purposes. So enabling and disabling subtitles could have a hotkey combination that might be a little harder to hit, or even could be part of the configurable debug menu in the same way that, enabling and disabling advanced tooltips and chunk borders and stuff like that are now. Obviously, you wouldn't want to remove it from the accessibility menu as well, because it's part of that suite of features, but I think it'd be neat to have something that allowed you to enable and disable it, so that even like hitting F3 could bring it up or make it disappear if need be.
They had the lightmap debug renderer was introduced with F3+4 as a keybind, right? So you could have a subtitle thing be like F3 plus whatever key that you want to press. So it's really unlikely that you're going to hit that combination in regular gameplay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's I think a few different options that could be present there, but yeah, really really neat to see people bringing this stuff up still, because that lets Mojang know what's ideally on players' radar for accessibility features for the future. Moving on to email number 3, this one comes in from Aero HDT with the subject of salty copper. Hi Johnny and Joel. With the inclusion of the Nautilus and the recent Copper Age drop, I couldn't help but pay attention to Pix's closing comment last show about aging copper. I'm no scientist, but I'd like to see a new mechanism for copper, salt. This could either come in the form of a deep ocean block or a drop from the passive Zombie Nautilus itself as a salt pile. Players would need to perhaps use a salt pile in a cauldron filled with water, and much like tipped arrows, be required to dip a copper item or stack in the salty cauldron to age it. It could be a mechanic to get the copper instantly to the oxidized stage of aging, plus introduce the potential of salt farms. You could then shine it back to whatever stage you prefer. This ties the Nautilus in nicely with the copper update. Aero HDT broke his axe polishing rusty copper.
That's an interesting idea to accelerate the oxidation of copper manually. And I'll confess that the builder in me went right to salt block. That sounds like fun. We could probably use another building block in the game. But I like the idea of maybe collecting it from the ocean, although I don't know how it would be visually different from calcite. When I think about like what would a salt block look like in Minecraft texture, my brain just kind of goes to calcite. So I don't know what you would do for like a white block, because something I used quite a bit actually in Westhill when I was making decorations inside was putting trapdoors around white concrete powder as salt, right? As like having a barrel of salt in like a butcher shop or something, for curing meats. And so I don't know what you would do differently necessarily for that. But it sounds like Aero was thinking more along the lines of having like salt as an item, like in the same way that sugar comes from a sugar cane. And then using that. I don't know if a cauldron would necessarily be how Java would do it. I get the idea that you would just use salt in your hand, much like you would use honeycomb in your hand to wax a block. You would use salt in your hand to oxidize a block. So every time you hit a block with salt, you'd use up one salt and it would oxidize one level farther. Which for the players out there that don't want to wait around, I think that's excellent control. It adds more gameplay. It's not like it's just adding the ability to an axe. Like if it was a Nautilus drop or some other way of getting salt, you'd have to either farm it, collect it. Like it would add this level of like, if you want to do this at scale, then you have to come up with some other thing before you do it. And I was thinking that rather than a Nautilus drop, it would be really interesting if they added some sort of evaporation mechanic in the game. I don't know how you communicate to a player that it would work. But I think back to my hiking trip in Utah where it was 104 degrees in the desert, and you'd get back to the car and you wouldn't be sweaty. You'd be salty. You'd just be dusty because your sweat would just evaporate the moment that it would leave you. And it would be really cool if you put like water on something like sand blocks or clay blocks in a warm or hot climate environment in Minecraft. So Badlands, desert, maybe savanna. And then that would then leave a salt layer, like a snow layer, or the water would evaporate and turn the block underneath it into salt. Like, I don't know how you necessarily do that in the game. But we sort of have stuff like that happening with like mud and dirt blocks right now. So like you could maybe see that kind of thing happening. And I think that could be an interesting way, because again, it would add some gameplay. Like if you wanted a lot of this stuff, you'd have to come up with some redstone farm or some cool mechanical way of putting it all together. But it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, for sure. Like I personally like the idea of keeping it in ocean biomes, especially because like water will come from anywhere. You can have like freshwater lakes and rivers and that kind of stuff. But like ocean water is probably like the source of salt that you'd want from Minecraft. And it's interesting to think of Minecraft water as having any kind of like salinity where it's not been a mechanic up until now. But Like, I think salt as like a deep ocean block, almost something that you had to go and mine, and then you could use the Nautilus even to gather that as like
Yes,
a
fair.
neat way of incorporating the Nautilus into like those deep ocean ravines could maybe be lined with salt crystals in the same way that an amethyst geode would form, and you could get some fun generation stuff in there. I do like the synergy of it. Part of me almost hopes that we don't get a means to instantly age copper, just because I've spent so much time finding contraption ways of doing it. And I sort of feel like Tango back when they changed iron farming mechanics, and he went, well, there goes my lifetime's work, you know. But he's rallied magnificently, I think, in the meantime. I wonder about other mechanics for salt, too, because salt is something that has historically been used to sow over like land where you don't want stuff to grow. Obviously, like salting the earth is the sort of like the notion historically that like when people were defeated and the people wanted their defeat to be kind of broadcast to everybody, the conquering army would like sow salt over the ruins of like a city, and it would make sure that like very little stuff grew there. And so like that's been mentioned in the past as a desirable feature in Minecraft to stop plants from growing beyond a certain state. And so maybe salt could be a way of doing that, of like freezing a crop mid-growth so that it doesn't grow any higher without the need to add string over the top or freeze ticks in a certain area, because obviously like wheat and stuff is not affected by string because it only grows one block high. We've also seen people data pack in recently ways to keep mobs at their younger stage, so that the little baby pigs stay as baby pigs or gastlings stay as gastlings. And so something similar could be a possibility for crops. Yeah, like sodium content is supposed to prevent stuff from growing just in general, so it seems like a neat possibility if you're adding salt as a mechanic to the game.
And something that we talked about a couple weeks ago in the show was trying to keep mobs in one spot, and having like a salt block as maybe like a salt lick in the middle of a field to keep your cows and horses from wandering too far could be a fun idea too.
Yeah, no, totally. That makes perfect sense for the barnyard animal sort of approach to it. Yeah, that's one way of thinking about it for sure. I'm imagining salt being a crystalline thing, sort of like amethyst now, and I feel like that suits it. So somewhere between amethyst, calcite, and ice blocks. Maybe a little bit of transparency thrown in there could be fun as well. I don't know. There's definitely options there, I think.
That could be fun, like rock salt, or like I'm thinking about the salt that I use for cooking, like when I do barbecue and I use like coarse ground sea salt, and it's really chunky and
something
for
like that.
For the people that like color out there, you can get some pink Himalayan salt blocks in Minecraft. I'm sure people would enjoy that. Our final email comes from Epica1082 Dungeon Upgrades. Hello, Joel and Pixel Riffs. Here's something on my Minecraft wish list. I've always been fascinated with regular old dungeons, the ones with spawners. However, they're really small and, to be honest, pretty tame. I think Mojang should update the dungeons by adding more rooms, sort of like a stronghold, but theme the dungeons with cobblestone. They would have mostly one mob with a couple of spawners of other mob types. Dungeons are really quite rare, so it would make them more rewarding when you find them. I also think each dungeon could have a boss room, which would also solve the problem of Minecraft only having 2 bosses. They could drop unique loot to you and something that you couldn't get anywhere else. Epica 1082 was slain by zombies while valiantly trying to defeat a boss zombie.
I've seen this happen a couple of times before with mods. Mods have added structures with multiple spawners in. I'm thinking about the times, I think it was in the Minecraft Harmony mod pack, where it was a mod that I think showed up elsewhere in things like roguelike adventures and dungeons, where they've sort of expanded on the idea of vanilla dungeons. There's a few more surface structures. You go underneath, it's more like a kind of cobblestone mineshaft kind of environment, and there are a bunch of different spawners around. I feel like, personally, they're never really that exciting, especially with Minecraft having moved on a little bit further in its development. I think the rest of the mod packs often provided more exciting stuff, so I feel like a lot of the time you're just going in there for the chest loot and then leaving again. But I feel like just adding more spawners to an environment like that, it's difficult, because I'm not certain how much gameplay balance is expected from there just being individual spawners most of the time. But it means finding a double spawner that naturally generated with 2 separate dungeons side by side feels like less of an event. And if you have a lot of different spawners all within the area being activated close to each other, that's a fairly powerful mob farm in theory. But single spawner farms are kind of underpowered these days compared to other solutions for mob drops and stuff. So I think it's a sort of it's balanced one way or the other anyway. So I'm not certain if I would want something like this. It's kind of a curious thought to rebalance those sort of dungeons at this stage, especially when we have like trial chambers now.
Well, that was my thought, is that trial chambers, I think, are the answer to this question. And instead of replacing existing dungeons, they just iterated and built something new that was inspired by, but had a lot more mechanics, a lot more space, was a lot more challenging, had new mobs, had new mechanics, that kind of thing. So I feel like that's how they moved forward without deleting like classic content. I don't remember when dungeons were added. I mean, they were in the game long before I started playing. So
yeah, definitely.
Like I feel like removing them or changing them would be met with a lot of, blowback from nostalgia and stuff that players, like using them for. I do think adding a bit to the dungeon structure would be cool. So right now, the room that happens to be around the spawner is not as big as the spawning space very often. And I think it could be cool even if it was still just a single spawner, if there were multiple rooms. And so imagine if you stumbled upon a room where there was zombies spawning in it, but you don't know where they're coming from. Like you can't see the spawner. They're just spawning in this room, and you have to then fight through them to then get to the next room and see where the source might be. They wouldn't be very big, 2 rooms, 3 rooms maybe. Vertical and horizontal. That might involve expanding the spawning area of a dungeon spawner. That could be interesting. Especially if you wanted to then, like you said, turn it into a mob spawner later, like a farm. They are kind of underpowered. So if they had a wider area, if you then could control that later, you could get more spawns and turn it into a slightly more useful farm in that way. I think that could be fun. I like the idea of having more of a variety of spawners, not necessarily all in one spot. I just mean that when you stumble upon spawners now, it's either zombie, spider, skeleton, or cave spider. And cave spider is specifically attached to abandoned mine shafts, usually, I think. And so it would be neat if there was husks, parched, bogged, maybe creepers. I'm not sure if we want creepers in that way, but maybe that goes against like the spirit of the original design and purpose of the creeper. But I think that could be fun. From a flavor perspective, I don't know what the difference would be. I mean, I guess if you want a certain kind of arrow, maybe if you wanted like, parched, for example, if you wanted to farm weakness arrows, then that could be a better way to do it. If you happened to find a dungeon spawner in a desert biome, like it would have to still, if it was too deep and it was in a different biome, maybe that wouldn't work. If it also goes against like the spawning mechanics for husks and parched are that they don't spawn in caves, but maybe the dungeon spawner would be the exception. And so that you could actually spawn something like that. I'm just thinking like if your home base was in a desert and you didn't have any way of collecting bones because you like parched were just not showing up as often as you want them to, it could be better to do it that way. It just as solution, like offering different solutions for players. But I do like the idea of adding more rooms. I think that that's kind of a solid way to make them a little bit more interesting, especially because Mojang does this thing now with the jigsaw puzzle way they put things together, like bastions and that kind of stuff. I think it could be fun to design 5 or 10 different rooms and then just randomly have 2 or 3 of them attached to every dungeon. And it's going to mean that when you find a dungeon, it's not going to be the same every time. It's not going to be just like a square box of cobblestone, right?
So for a bit of Minecraft history, monster rooms, as they were initially known, were first added in InfDev on June 25th, 2010. So we're talking more than a 15-year-old feature at this point. But I do think, revisiting them in the form of trial chambers was really the point of trial chambers, was trying to expand on the concept. I think the thing that's different about Epica's email, though, is the existence of a boss room being part of it. And that's an interesting concept. I like the idea of Minecraft having more dynamic combat challenges and sort of mini bosses like this. And I think in practice, there are a lot of things to consider about that are potential issues. Like, do the bosses respawn? And do they respawn in the same way that zombies spawn from the spawner block? is that something that has like a cooldown from any dungeon spawner that you find, or is it like a specific type of spawner, or is it just something based in the location? Can they be summoned? And I think that's the thing about the Wither and the Ender Dragon that works well for like a multiplayer experience, is the fact that you can respawn them and players can have the opportunity to fight them if they missed the fight the first time around. The other thing is that the Wither and the Ender Dragon can both destroy blocks, which makes them difficult to contain via traditional attempts. And there are obviously like ways people have found of doing it, but if a new boss appears in this dungeon area, can it be contained? If it can be contained, then it can be cheesed, and that sort of trivializes the combat experience of it for the player. But if it can break out, then that has other potential hazards, like does it end up destroying players' builds? Does it end up just breaking into a nearby cave and sinking into the lava, Terminator 2 style? Like, how does that end up working, right? So I'm curious how adding a boss to the experience changes the challenge for both the players and for the development team in making something that feels like an organic encounter and still feels fun to do, but doesn't end up being something that players ultimately end up exploiting the same way we end up exploiting things like monster spawners. Or is it really a concern, and should player exploitation of these sort of features just be an expected part of the game? Because we know Minecraft players at this point, we know that people are going to mess around with that stuff and find ways to break it in entertaining ways.
Yeah, if there was a respawning boss, I could see players turning it into some sort of farm in the same way that resin farms are a thing from the Creaking. And
yeah,
I mean, you can't, the warden doesn't drop anything, but then, I mean, you mentioned Tango Tech. Tango is using wardens as mobs and effects, like status effects in mini games, right? So
yeah.
Farming wardens does have a purpose. Like, players will find a way. It's like Jurassic Park, right?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah, and I think maybe that's part of the reason they haven't enabled too many more bosses, is that they don't want players to create Jurassic Park. Either way, I think that is probably where we'll wrap up this episode of the Spawn Chunks for the holidays. Thank you so much for having all of these emails be part of the discussion. We've really appreciated the emails that we've got, and hopefully folks will be interested to send us some more stuff to chat about as we move into next year. For now, you can find more information about our show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, please consider putting some value back in. You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Pledging at any of our paid tiers gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. We have monthly hangouts with our patrons where you can tell us what you've been up to in Minecraft, and we currently, at the time of recording, have 261 patrons. Thank you all so much for your support throughout 2025. There is always room for more in 2026. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons. That's Kinda Beald, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, and That Penguin Dude. And once again, a shout out to the 21 members of our community who have closed out 2025 with annual memberships. Thanks so much for pledging to support us for the next year. We are really looking forward to 2026.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. It's free. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are published on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. There are video versions on YouTube and on Spotify. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page, and that's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by PixelRiffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/PixelRiffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for the aforementioned YouTube series and beyond. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at PixelRiffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
I will point you towards the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. Last night, we recorded episode 500, which was the Holiday Roundtable, and we've got discussions from a number of my friends about the top 3 watches in 2025, as well as their top 3 nostalgia watches. So that's something you can look forward to, as well as a pre-recorded segment with none other than Johnny here from the Spawn Chunks for that episode. So big 500 on the Citadel Cafe was a lot of fun. I am Joel Duggan on social media, very easy to find. Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream Tuesday through Friday at 9 a.m. and Saturdays at 1. Most of the time I'm working in Minecraft, but over the holidays I'm hoping to add in some other games for fun. So check it out, twitch.tv/Joel Duggan.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. 2025 is ending, but the world outside is infinite.